Okay. In this chapter, we're going to talk about analyzing the audience. So we're going to talk about a couple of different things, what to think about when you're writing your speech, where to start, how to approach the different aspects of your speech, depending on your audience members. So what we're going to go over is audience analysis, audience demographics, diverse audiences, how to learn about your audiences, and analyzing the speech setting and context. The very first thing we're going to talk about is audience analysis. So what is audience analysis? It is the process of gathering and analyzing information about audience members' attitudes and motivations with the explicit aim of preparing your speech in ways that will be meaningful to them. So you want to think about what's going to be interesting to your audience. What do we want to hear about? Who is your audience so that you can figure out what the best message is for them. And sometimes your message is going to be given to you. So let's say that you're giving a presentation at work and they're giving you your message. You would use audience analysis to figure out how you're going to approach the message, how you're going to get the message across to your audience in an interesting way. An audience-centered perspective is when you think about your audience the entire time. So when you're picking your topic, when you're picking the organizational pattern you're going to use, how you're going to prepare the speech, how you're going to deliver the speech, if you're going to use multimedia, those kind of things, you want to know who your audience is so that you can best fit your message to that audience. So as you're doing this, as you're thinking about it, some of the things that you want to do is you want to appeal to your audience members' attitudes, beliefs, and values. So you want to figure out what they're feeling, what they're thinking, where they're from, those kind of things. So most of the time, if you were taking this class face-to-face at Texas Tech on the Lubbock campus, you would be in a very rural community. West Texas, homegrown, Christian, conservative values, all of those things would be things that you want to think about. You would want to think about, how to evoke emotion from your audience members. So the next thing on the next bullet point on the PowerPoint says, if the value fits, use it. In your book, it talks about finding something that will evoke emotion, one of your audience members' attitudes, beliefs, and values. So a good example that I use for this, when we're in a face-to-face class, I tell my students to look around the classroom in a way to be sensitive to their audience members. I use the example of abortion. 1 in 10 women have had an abortion. So if we were in a face-to-face classroom, I would ask you to look around and to think about how maybe one of the girls in this classroom has had an abortion. Statistically, one of the girls in our class has had an abortion. So the way that you would address that situation would be very different because you would want to be careful of evoking the wrong kind of emotion. So you want to find emotions in your family, in your audience, that make them want to listen to your speech or want to make a change or want to do something better. The next thing is you want to gauge your listeners' feelings toward the topic, speaker, and occasion. So on page 85 of your book, it gives you some ways to gauge your listeners' feelings towards the topic. So you want to find out if the topic is new to your listeners, if listeners know relatively little about the topic. So a good example of this is if you're an engineering student and everyone in our class is an English major, then you could speak on a topic in engineering because probably none of us would know anything about the topic. And if we did, it would be relatively little because nobody else is in that field or able to relate to the knowledge that you have, so you could teach us a whole lot about that. Find out if your listeners are negatively disposed to the topic. Or if they hold a positive attitude toward the topic. So depending on what the topic is, what the situation is, you might be able to gauge if they, let's go back to abortion. If you're talking to a group of Catholic priests, they're going to be negatively disposed to abortion, as opposed to if you're talking to them about pro-life, they're going to have a positive attitude toward the topic. Are your listeners a captive audience? Are you talking to a group of 3-year-olds? Are you talking to a group of 25-year-olds? Are you talking to a group of low-level employees or to a group of CEOs? So those are some ways that you can kind of gauge that. And then gauge the listener's feelings toward the speaker. So the speaker and occasion, I'm going to kind of combine those two and talk about both of those. So if this class was a Monday morning at 8 a.m., I would know your feelings towards me and the course and the occasion, right? You don't want to be there at 8 a.m. You're angry with me because you think it's my fault that the course is at 8 a.m. And you don't want to do anything that I'm asking you to do at 8 a.m. Just a hint, most of your professors don't want to be there at 8 a.m. either. So if this class were Monday morning at 8 a.m., I would have to be much more lively than if the course was at 10 a.m. or 11 a.m. I would have to be much more engaging. I would have to make you laugh a lot more. I would have to be funnier. I would have to do a lot more to keep you listening to me and engaged and learning with me than if the class was later in the day. So what is your audience's perspective towards you and towards the occasion? The next thing that we're going to talk about is audience demographics. So these are just some examples of different demographics that you can find out about your audience. So their age, ethnic or cultural background, socioeconomic status, and within this, I would think about education. So you know that most of your audience members probably don't have a college degree. Most of your audience members probably don't have a job. If they do, it's not a very high level or high authority kind of job because this is a group of college students. So you might think about them being freshmen versus seniors. Think about all of those different things when you're thinking socioeconomic status. Think about their religion, political affiliations. Again, being in a small West Texas town, probably most people are conservative. Most people are probably Republican. Think about the gender, group affiliations, and disabilities that your audience members may have. Doing this, figuring out your audience demographics, you're going to figure out your target audience. You're going to figure out exactly who you're talking to and who you want to get your message across to. Some people will use audience segmentation and think about how they can break their audience into smaller groups. So think about if you can break your audience into, there's 10 women and 10 men, or there's 10 Christians and 10 Muslims, so that you can address things that fit into both of those categories. You can find common ground with both of those types of people. With this, you're going to come across diverse audience. You're going to have audiences in which you have various audience members that come from different backgrounds. So individualism versus collectivism. In America, we're a very individualistic culture. We only think about our own needs as opposed to the needs of the greater good, as opposed to the needs of the community or the country. If you think about countries like Iran or Jordan, they're very collectivistic. They don't think about the greater good of themselves. They think about their community and their country and their religion. Uncertainty avoidance is the extent to which people in a given culture feel threatened by ambiguity. Probably in America, there's not a whole lot of high uncertainty avoidance. We're very low uncertainty avoidance. We're more accepting of uncertain situations in our lives. And so we allow more variation in our individual behavior. So think about that if you have someone in your audience that may have high uncertainty avoidance because of their culture. You might want to be a little bit more delicate in the way that you address something. The next one is power distance. And this is when people in a culture see inequality and authority as normal. So in some cultures, there's a hierarchy, and you want to be careful of the way that you address things. So in some cultures, women are not allowed to give presentations. Women are not allowed to speak in front of large groups of people. So as a woman, you would have to address that carefully. Or as a male, you would have to address the way that you speak to women carefully. The next one is masculinity and femininity. This is the degree to which a culture values traits that are associated with the traditional or stereotypical views of masculinity or femininity. In America, we are very masculine. We focus on ambition, assertiveness, and competitiveness, as opposed to the feminine cultures, which focus on nurturance and cooperation. So if you look at places like the Philippines, South Africa, they're very masculine. America is also very masculine. And your book talks a little bit more about what cultures are higher or lower in these different culturalistic values. And then long-term versus short-term orientation. In America, we're very short-term. We're focused on what am I going to do in the near future rather than what am I going to do in the long term, or how am I going to serve to better my country or to better my community in the long term versus just my lifespan. And then the last one is focus on universal values. So universal values include love, truthfulness, fairness, unity, tolerance, responsibility, and respect for life. So focus on those things. Most people find that they can relate to those things. So when you focus on those, they feel like they can relate to you as a speaker a little bit better. Different ways to learn about your audience. So I would say that interviewing your audience members and surveying your audience members is a little bit unrealistic. So if you have the opportunity to interview your audience members, if you're maybe having a smaller group of people that you're speaking to in a work setting, maybe you can talk to each of them and say, you know, what is it that I can address in my presentation that will help you or make you feel better? If you're able to survey your audience, maybe you're able to send out a questionnaire ahead of time. Be prepared to not get all of those back or to get some back late, to get some back at the last minute. But maybe you can send these out ahead of time so that you can see what your audience members know about your presentation, how they feel about your presentation. But I would say the very best way to learn about your audience is to consult published sources. So look for things that have been published that talk about, you know, what interests college students. What do college students want to hear about? You know, in West Lubbock, West Texas, what are some important topics that I can talk about as a speaker? Those kind of things will help you to kind of gauge what your audience knows or doesn't know, or how they might feel about your topic ahead of time. The last thing we're going to talk about is analyzing the speech setting and context. So think about the size of your audience. So in this class, 25 people are going to be watching your speech. So if we were in a face-to-face setting, you would have to think about, you know, the way that you're going to look at your audience members, the way that you're going to walk around the classroom, which goes into the physical setting. So where are you? If we were outdoors, you would have to account for that. You would have to account for you know, jackhammers going off, or airplanes flying over, birds chirping. You would have to come into think about all of those things. Think about the time and length of your speech. So for this speech, it is timed. You have, for all of your speeches, in my head, I'm thinking of the informative speech, but for all of your speeches, you have a time span. In the future, you might not have a specific time span that you need to fit into, but you still want to respect your audience members' time. So if you have a business meeting that's an hour long and you know that there's, you know, 5 speakers, be respectful of their time and be respectful of everybody in that meeting, so that they're not thinking, you know, is this person ever going to be done? Is this person ever going to stop talking? Those kind of things. And then finally, the rhetorical situation. This is when you deliver a speech in a particular circumstance for a particular reason. So, you know, let's say that you are speaking after someone that is a very prominent member of the community, and you're speaking about something that is very important to them or that they're very passionate about. You want to take all of those things into account and be very analytical in the way that you speak about those things. So that is all for this chapter. If you have any questions or if there's anything that you're not really clear about, please feel free to email me during my anytime, but specifically during my online office hours, or if you want to set up a time to have a phone call, let me know and we will get that scheduled and taken care of. Thank you and have a great week.